Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frank Costanzo, and I'm your host today. I'm Vice President with Springer Publishing, and our webinar today is about how to pay for your graduate nursing degree without going broke. The sponsor of our webinar today is the University of San Francisco School of Nursing and Health Professions, and we're thrilled to have the opportunity to present this webinar today on behalf of the University of San Francisco. Each participant in our webinar today will receive a copy of the book, Pay for Your Graduate Nursing Degree Without Going Broke, and again, that'll be provided free of charge, compliments of the University of San Francisco. Please stay to the end of this webinar so you can complete a brief one-question survey and provide us with your address information so we can ship the book to you. We expect our webinar to last about 40 minutes. Feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar, as we have a team of representatives from the University of San Francisco School of Nursing to answer any questions about their program. During the webinar, simply use the chat button to ask any questions of USF. We will set aside some time at the end for questions for our speaker, Mr. Carl Buck, and as well as any questions for the USF team. Let's get started today with an introduction. Today I'm joined by Mr. Carl Buck, one of the authors of the book, Pay for Your Graduate Nursing Degree Without Going Broke. Good afternoon, Carl.
Well, good afternoon and good morning to others as well.
Thanks, Carl. Carl's book was just published last month and includes some critical information and tips that you must know about paying for your graduate nursing degree. I'm going to provide a little bit of an overview regarding Carl. Carl is a college financial aid expert with more than 30 years of experience guiding students, parents, and educators on matters related to how to pay for college. And as the former director of financial aid at leading institutions such as Rice University, Rutgers University, and the director of financial aid counseling at the University of California, Carl brings his unique insight and unique inside perspective to individuals and families challenged with keeping up with the rising cost of college, both undergrad and graduate. So Carl has appeared on numerous talk shows, and he's been extensively quoted on financial aid matters in leading media such as the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Kiplinger's, and Bloomberg Radio. And then most recently, Carl served as vice president at Chase Student Loans, and he was a senior consultant at Discover Student Loans. So Carl and I, our primary objective today is really to share some critical information that will provide individuals with confidence to find their pathway that will help each of them confidently apply, afford, and achieve their graduate nursing degree. And Carl, I know you've been involved in this, helping individuals determine how to lower the cost of education for over 30 years. And I know that your mission has been to help provide answers to the financial part of the puzzle associated with helping individuals afford undergraduate and graduate degrees. So Carl, let's start with a question for you. When you reflect on the financial aspects of paying for a graduate nursing degree, what are some of the top challenges that individuals face in the current environment today?
Well, fair question, Frank. And when I was co-writing this book with Rick Darvis, who was a CPA, the things that I found in doing research and in talking with leading nursing aid directors throughout the country is that students need to understand what their best funding options are, because in the mix of going on to grad school, many applicants might have just come off of their undergrad attendance, or they're coming back after a number of years. So you have a mix and you have a challenge, and student financial aid, either undergrad or grad, is a very fluid situation. There's nothing that's static. It changes all the time. And institutions can change all the time as well. So what I have found is, and I'm very appreciative of this collaborative effort between the University of San Francisco School of Nursing and with Springer Publications, to really clarify for nurses going on for the grad degrees, what is the landscape really like? So choosing the best funding options is one. Knowing and understanding how to keep your student loan debt down, and USF does a good job of that. Knowing the full cost of attendance, meaning full transparency. And if you go to a college's website, it's not that easy to land there and find the full cost of attendance for grad school. It just isn't focused on nursing. And then I think it's very important today that prior to graduation, nurses have to understand how to move forward with their loan repayment, which is a very, again, fluid situation. It's changing all the time. And we'll talk more about that later on. So I just think it's important for the attendees today to take ownership of the process, and that will be a recurring theme I'll bring up today. Take ownership of the process and reach out to the USF School of Nursing and Health Professions Financial Aid Office, because they are your advocate.
Yeah, those are some great points, Carl. Thank you for sharing those. Let's kind of move into how we'll help address those and discuss the opportunities to actually reduce the costs associated with higher education. So, Carl, take us through some of the topics you'll be covering today.
Well, we are going to take a look at that infamous free application for federal student aid, known as the FAFSA. And for, again, some on this webinar today will be very familiar with it. Others, perhaps returning to grad school, may need to be aware of some of the major changes that have occurred fairly recently. And what are some of the strategies for successfully applying for scholarships, either at the institution you're interested in, such as USF, or taking a look at external scholarships throughout the country. And we'll talk about that because they are covered in our book. And then there are innovative financial benefits associated with accelerated degree programs, which I just learned about recently by USF School of Nursing, which I think is a strong focus on making nurses' lives better. Understanding your graduate student loan options, because invariably the ability to borrow is always there, but to understand how you really compare student loan opportunities takes work. And that's why I keep talking about take ownership of the process. And then evaluate your own financial aid offer or award, because various colleges throughout the country have different ways of utilizing language to describe their aid award. And my understanding is that USF sends via email their aid award, which I think is smart, but you have to understand what the language is to ensure what are grants based on need, what are scholarships based on merit, and how much do you have to pay back eventually. And we'll talk about that as we progress today. And then understanding the entire full cost of your nursing degree, as I mentioned earlier. Working with a student not too long ago, attending a well-known East Coast institution, Grad School of Nursing, I used a sample award letter, looked at it, and advised her to go back to the aid office and have them describe to her very clearly what was the actual award, how much did she have to owe, and what was her expected family contribution. So these are the things we're going to cover.
Yeah, that's terrific, Carl. And it's such a terrific point that you make to take control of the whole financial aid process or take ownership of it, as you said. And Carl, I know in your book you speak about the best ways to approach the challenge of paying for higher education, and you start by talking about the financial aid maze. So what are some of the best ways to kind of approach the application process?
Good lead in, Frank. Well, number one, in my opinion, is that students have to become aware of and understand the financial aid timelines that every college can have. You need to understand the submission requirements. You have to be aware of scholarship timelines versus financial aid, need-based timelines, because they can be distinctly different. And if you aren't aware of that, that's why, again, we're saying take ownership of the process. That's what a nursing candidate can do, is to really set up their own spreadsheet. And let's presume they're applying to 2 or 3 different colleges of nursing, although their end-up selection will be obviously USF. But as they are going over their reviews, they have to understand that every college is unique. I remember talking to another school who will be nameless, well-known school, very strong brand, and this is in the Southeast. And the financial aid director at the College of Nursing said, you know, Carl, the one thing I wish nurses do at our institution is come better prepared. And I wanted him to define what that meant. Basically, he was talking about earlier planning. So we'll cover that today as well. So not only to become aware of and understand the timelines and submission requirements, but understand now that with the FAFSA, students are reporting prior year tax information. Historically, students applying for student aid, submitting the FAFSA would send in prior year's income. Now it's 2 years. And that changes a lot of dynamics, which we'll discuss later on, because it ties in with possible appeals. You've got to get a federal student aid ID. You've got to have your tax information ready, your investments, your savings. And most of all, I think, is become very familiar with a new and revamped federal website, which is studentaid.gov. Studentaid.gov. Actually, there's an article just written about how the new bells and whistles are out there for studentaid.gov, particularly when students want to know more about the loan history, loan repayments. And I think the jury's still out on that, but I would applaud the Federal Department of Education because at least they're making an attempt at making students' lives better. The other tip I would suggest is to speak to the grad college's financial aid office before you apply for student aid, just to ensure that you have all of the detail that you need to apply and you don't miss a step, because sometimes missing one step can mean, in effect, you missed all steps. And my recommendation, having been in the field as an aid director as well in the past, is apply for financial aid before waiting to be admitted. It takes time for the process to be completed. And there are times when students will say, should I wait to be admitted, then apply for aid? And I say no. Apply for aid initially, and then you're applying for admission as well. We're getting into the aspect of it's never too early, and it's really not. It goes back to the comment made by a former director, or a current former director of financial aid in the Southeast, who said nurses need to come better prepared. And I think what has to happen is know again what your deadline dates are for both admissions and student aid. And believe it or not, this is an aberration, but it happens. And thank goodness USF doesn't require this. But there are some grad nursing colleges that will require, even though a student is in their 20s, parental information from that student. And that's a little unusual because when a student becomes independent, meaning they're 24 years old or older, generically speaking, or have their first undergrad degree, they are declared independent. And they would be surprised to learn that not all, but some grad colleges of nursing will require parental information. And that throws students off for a loop, as you can imagine. And again, it's important for early preparation to follow up and follow through. Moving forward with the additional comments about the checklist, again, this is really important. That's why I wanted us to repeat this. You've got to use the prior year information, and that throws people off as well. And we'll talk about appeals later on during this webinar as to how you can compare your prior year, your prior last year, and your projected year income to say what I submitted on the FAFSA for my income from 2 years ago, it's not really relevant and it's not current. And as I just said before, surprise, surprise, and it's more than one institution. And I was surprised by this, by the way. I didn't realize that some institutions require parental information on the FAFSA, even if the student is under the age of 20. I'm sorry, under the age of 30.
Carl, I have a question for you. Is it necessary to complete the FAFSA every year?
If you're attending grad school more than 1 year, the answer is yes.
Okay.
Things will change every year. Your income can change. You can have special life circumstances that will change. And the financial aid officer at grad schools throughout the country will take a look at patterns and determine what your situation is from one year to the next, and possibly your grad school financial aid award could be different from one year to the next, meaning it's not necessarily guaranteed. What you got in year one will be the same as year two.
Shall we move on to scholarships, Carl?
We're going to see very early on the innovative scholarships that are offered by USF. And institutional scholarships are awarded by the college itself. They may have endowment funds that they're awarding, and they certainly will have perhaps other donors that have given to the university to support need-based free grant assistance and free merit scholarship funds as well. Who is eligible? Well, students who are submitting that FAFSA would be reviewed for need-based assistance to determine loan eligibility, need-based grants, and in some instances, possibly merit scholarships as well. And as it relates to understanding merit scholarship opportunities, there may be, in some instances, a separate application that's required. Some institutions will say the FAFSA is the one-size-fits-all student aid application for both need-based and merit. And some institutions will say, in addition to the FAFSA filing, you also have to submit a separate application for merit scholarships. And the thing what I liked about USF is they have both opportunities. They have a need-based grant and they have merit scholarship opportunities. And Frank just let me know today that there's a brand new scholarship we'll be talking about later for next year. And what's interesting, again, in my research that we talk about in the book, is there really are, in my opinion, too many grad schools of nursing that don't offer the kind of robust funding that USF is offering. And they're not paying me to say this. That's just reality. I'm trying to give you the unvarnished truth. And that surprised me because some of these institutions that I contacted, that I researched, one in particular, their grad school of nursing degree was approximately $125,000, and it covered about 2 academic semesters and 1 summer session. That was a heck of a lot of money, and very, very, very minimal grant money given to the student who contacted me for further guidance.
Carl, are there a few scholarship sites that you can suggest for the audience? I know you cover quite a few in your book.
Yes, we've listed probably 20 sites to go to in the book. And the ones that I felt were applicable for today, you have the Nurses Education Funds. It offers several scholarships to nurses pursuing advanced nursing degrees. Again, the Nurses Education Funds. By the way, that's on page 128 for those who get the book. And Johnson & Johnson, offering a variety of nursing funding opportunities and scholarships. You have the American Association of Nurse Practitioners. They provide financial support to nursing students to advance their NP education. And you can also go to collegescholarships.org to find a variety of other nursing financial aid and scholarship opportunities. Again, those are a sample. We do have literally over 20 sites to turn towards in the book.
No, that's helpful, Carl. Excellent.
Well, this is interesting, and when I did my research prior to the webinar, I had shared with Frank what impressed me was the creative aspect of these offerings. Again, and I mean this legitimately, unlike some other institutions. So here you have scholarships being offered to both entering and continuing students of the School of Nursing and Health Professions. You've got the majority of nursing scholarships awarded on financial need. But again, now remember, that's free money. And there's no FAFSA filing deadline. They also offer a limited number of merit scholarships. And what I found very unique, you see this 1 to 3 agency and cohort scholarship. I've never seen this before. It supports students starting the MSN for registered nurses going on, for their MSN, only with their friends and colleagues. So stay close to your friends. Keep your close, that are coming from the same agency, same hospital, or the same employer. And then 3 students must start the program in the same semester, and they must be associated with one another personally or professionally. What I would do is, come holiday time, keep exchanging those gifts. And then each will receive a $3,000 scholarship that's dispersed over 6 semesters, and of course, contingent upon maintaining a 3.0 GPA, which is, for this scholarship, probably satisfactory progress as well. So I think that's extremely innovative. Now, the nursing school itself was founded in 1954 and is well respected among a variety of healthcare agencies, and it is rated among the best graduate schools in the country for training nurses to assume leadership roles, and that will be ever prevalent as we move forward through the next decade. Interesting to me was it allows associate degree nurses to bypass their BSN and receive a master's degree in just 2 years. So it allows an accelerated way for BSN nurses to complete their DPN nursing program. And what's so interesting, not only does that enable people to get into the work field again, but the sooner they're into that work field, they can pay down that student debt, which hopefully we're going to minimize throughout this presentation.
Yeah, those are 2 excellent examples, Carl. As we were preparing for this, there was another excellent opportunity that was introduced to us, and this is the Nurse Practitioners and Communities Together Trainee Award. And so what this is, it's a USF degree program that invites applicants to apply for this award. And it's focused on RNs that are interested in becoming family or psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner with a commitment to providing primary care among rural or otherwise medically underserved populations. And they're really encouraged to apply for the academic year 2020 to 2021. We learned that priority is given to applicants with an interest in completing the DNP project and addressing substance abuse disorders or other behavioral issues, including child obesity, or expanding the use of telehealth technologies. So this is an excellent award for up to $21,875. As you can see, the qualifications at the bottom: an earned Bachelor of Science of Nursing, admissions to the USF Family Nurse Practitioner or Psychiatric Mental Health Nurse Practitioner DNP program, and the application requires the NPCT application plus some supplemental materials that need to be submitted by June 1. So this is yet again another excellent opportunity that we learned about. So Carl, I know in your book you provided a lot of detailed information regarding the wide range of loans available as well. Can you just touch on some of the loan options available for future graduate nursing students and kind of explain some of the primary differences? That would be great.
Sure, and perhaps some attending the webinar may be familiar with some of this information, but if nothing else, it'll be a reminder of what currently exists, and for others it could be brand new. But in the federal direct student loan area for graduate nurses now, that's what we're talking about, you have a graduate unsubsidized loan, and currently on an annual basis you can borrow $20,500 a year up to a max of $138,500. So you can always borrow. But again, what I liked about USF is they're offering need-based grant assistance and, where possible, merit scholarships to minimize that debt obligation. Now, in the grad unsub area, the current interest rate is just over 6%, but bear in mind there is a fee that's attached when that loan is dispersed, and that fee is 1.5%. So you have to factor in interest rate at 6% approximately, and a fee of 1.5%. That's the grad unsub, meaning unlike if you were taking out a subsidized grad, that subsidized loan, the interest was paid by the federal government. Not in this situation. Then moving on to the Plus loan, you can actually borrow up to the full cost of attendance minus any other aid you're receiving. Now, the rates go up significantly. The grad and sub interest rate at about 6%. The grad plus interest rate 7.08%. The grad and sub fee 1.5%. The grad plus fee 4.236%. The point being that that money, those fee dollars, are taken off the top of what you thought you might get in actual loans, but you'll have to pay that back. The other is understanding that with the Grad Plus, it's based on a credit check, and you may need a co-signer. These are federal programs. And then you have nursing student loans that can be offered actually by private lenders as well and other agencies. But in the private education area, which is growing exponentially, and historically one would think of private loans as coming from a bank, but that's not the case anymore. You have other entities that are not banks, that are other companies, SoFi being one, that will offer private education loans. Now, I've worked with JP Morgan Chase in the student loan world. I've worked for Discover Student Loan, so I have a pretty good handle on what's going on in the private lending area. And quite candidly, if I were looking at private loans, and I would always go with a federal loan first, in my opinion. They have greater flexibility in a variety of ways. Deferment, forbearance, I know that's a lot of detail, but I would go that direction first. But I would take a look at credit unions. Credit unions, historically, over the last 5 years, have competed very favorably with, say, Wells Fargo, with Discover, with Sallie Mae. So I would definitely look very closely at credit unions. And there's actually a site called creditunionstudentchoice.com to factor that in. I don't represent any lender. I'm just trying to give you more of a big picture thinking. And there's also one site to go to. It's called Nurse Core Loan, and they deal with loan repayments as well. And they have a nursing loan repayment guide, Nurse Core Loan Repayment Program Guide. I would move forward. Now we get into the world of loan repayment. And to me, this is enigmatic. And I would be interested after the presentation to get a sense of what USF thinks about loan repayments, what's going on in the loan world. It's a very fluid world today, and it will be ever changing. Basically, when a student is going back to school, let's say they've received their undergrad degree and they're moving on into their grad programs, they can request a deferment, meaning they don't have to pay their prior loan as long as they're in grad school going at least half time. But you have to bear in mind, when you're doing that, the interest will continue to accrue because the loan is unsubsidized. Now, there's a lot of detail, and it was interesting preparing for this webinar. I kept thinking, my goodness, there could be a whole hour just on student loans themselves and understanding it, understanding loan repayment, income-based student loan repayment plans. It's really all over the map, and regrettably, the Department of Education, Federal Department of Education, hasn't done terribly well by students and having their backs. And they're trying to do a better job, and I hope they do. But if you are going on grad school at USF, you should notify your lender or your loan servicer that you're continuing your education and that you're going at least half time, and you want to do it before your grace period ends so that there's a smooth flow for you. Again, contact your lender, your school, and you need to complete an in-school deferment request before your grace period is up. And in my opinion, again, this goes back to USF School of Nursing Financial Aid Office. I would double check with the personnel at the university to determine that everything is in order, because this is where the devil's in the real detail and things can break down. And all of a sudden you're being hounded to repay your loan. You're thinking, wait a minute, I'm in grad school. Something's gone awry and I don't quite understand it. Really taking a look at a checklist for understanding what you need to know about that financial aid offer, which I referenced earlier in this webinar. What do you need to look for? Well, you need to see, in my opinion, what is your expected family contribution? I was advising a young woman who's going to a well-known school in the Northeast, and I serve on the board of trustees for a girls' camp in Connecticut, as I live in Sarasota, Florida. And she approached me and found out what I do professionally for a living. So I worked with her for a long time. And when she sent me her award letter, I said, oh my goodness, I've been in this industry many years, worked as an aid officer. I can't understand this aid award. So from a student advocate perspective, I think it's important that you ask the financial aid office to explain to you what is your expected family contribution, because sometimes it may not be in the offer letter. You have to understand now how this all works. What is your cost of attendance at the institution? What is your expected family contribution, which comes off of the FAFSA? And then your need is to be met by what sources? Hopefully need-based grants, merit scholarships, and then in some instances, loans. That's what you have to do. You have to ask questions. And again, you have to own the process. Again, taking a look at your full costs. And this is all-encompassing. It isn't just tuition and fees can be significant in my research, but it has to do with maybe on-campus, off-campus. Some nursing grad schools are online, etc. So are all of the indirect costs beyond just tuition, fees, books in the award letter? And how much is money that you don't have to repay? And will it change from year to year? It may. And that's the question that Frank asked earlier in the webinar presentation.
Carl, when you talk about how much is free money, is that referring to money that you don't have to repay? Is that what you're referring to there? Yeah,
again, such as USF having need-based grants based upon FAFSA submission, and they have some merit scholarships as well. So the combination of those dollars, need-based grants and merit scholarship based upon scholastic achievement or other background strengths would be free money.
Got it.
Appealing is interesting. Some people choose not to appeal, thinking it will have a negative impact on perhaps their being admitted to the institution or their student aid award in subsequent years, but that is not the case. Hasn't been for me at all, regardless of the institutions I've been associated with, nor research that I've conducted. But people will say to me, well, what do I appeal? You can appeal anything you want. And there are some colleges who actually have a real appeal letter, sample letter on their website. You've got to take a look at how do you appeal? What do they want? Are there times they're involved in any of this? So what I suggest you do is to take a look at if you have special circumstances. For example, regrettably, in California, you had terrible fires that impacted many, many families, and I suspect students as well. So what you need to do is to make an appointment. And I always say to audiences with a key decision maker, oh, Carl, who is that? If it were me, I would want to get to a director, associate director, and assistant director, and see if I can meet in person with my documentation, because there's truth and proof for aid officers. They want to do the best they can to support students, but they're also audited, sometimes internal auditors, sometimes state and federal, sometimes all of it. And if they're going to keep the lights on, they have to make sure that they can corroborate what a student is appealing. So you need to have that backup and the documentation for yourself and for the institution.
Carl, just once again, can you provide an example of one of the more common reasons for an appeal?
Sure. Natural disasters, fires, floods in Florida, regrettably hurricanes that hit the panhandle.
Or California even, right?
California as well. So I would say natural disasters.
Okay.
Other things would be, as I referenced earlier, if you're reporting prior year income and it was relatively significant, and the needs analysis is based upon earnings you had from 2 years ago, but that's not your reality today, I would definitely bring that up to a financial aid officer for discussion, because if you're going back to school, your earnings may be exactly what you're receiving from, in effect, student aid. And then your projected year earnings are nowhere near what either your prior year earnings were or what your prior year earnings were. So projected year earnings as well. Again, whatever that family feels are special circumstances. And in some instances, you can have a child that has some severe disabilities, not necessarily covered by insurance. You can have separation of spouses. There are a variety of things to appeal, but I would definitely check the Grad School of Nursing website to see what are their requirements to appeal. But if you can, possibly do it in person.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thanks, Carl.
More on our checklist. Our checklist will be as long as a grocery list, I think, Frank. Again, understand the full cost of attendance for the year, regardless of the institution. And if I'm asking as a consumer and as a nursing advocate, what is the expectation that your financial aid award will remain the same in the following year? Excuse me, in most instances, there won't be that guarantee. There could be, but probably unlikely. And I think this is pivotal as well. I would ask the grad school aid counselor, on average, typically, how much do nursing students borrow at their school in order to earn their grad nursing degree, because that's going to start giving you some insight as to what your future is going to look like, debt burden-wise. And I would hope that institutions will be more proactive in this aspect of ensuring that students realize where they are in the loan process, what it looks like for the future. That's why we talked about student loan repayment programs, loan forgiveness. It's all over the map, but I definitely would lean on the financial aid office to guide you through the process. And if it's possible, speak to other graduate nursing students at, say, at USF to get an idea of what's going on at the institution and what are some of the inside tips, so you get the sense of the pulse and the rhythm of the campus.
Yeah, that's an excellent tip. So, Carl, we've covered a lot of ground. We started with talking about some critical tips to remember when completing the FAFSA for your graduate nursing degree. We then touched on strategies for successfully applying to scholarships. That was very helpful and insightful. We then touched on some of the innovative financial benefits associated with the USF School of Nursing accelerated degree programs, and we also talked about some student loan options and appealing. So this has been a fact-filled webinar, and let's just cover some of your final thoughts here, and we'll wrap it up with some questions.
Sure, thanks, Frank. Again, you know, there's they say an old minister prayer when you're talking about public speaking. Tell the audience what you want them to know, then tell them. Remind them what you just told them. So that's what we're doing here. Again, own the process, because the institution owns their processes. And as a nursing advocate, and I think that's what Springer Publications is, and we hope that that's what the book is, and I know that's what USF is, but still take ownership of the process yourself, because you're obviously worth it. Be aware of what the school policies and funding awards are, because they can change every year. And as Frank referenced earlier, the good news that USF has this brand new nursing scholarship, but that nursing scholarship also requires a supplemental application. And that's what we were talking about earlier on. So follow their detail to make sure you know how to apply and compete for that award. What is your overall projected debt burden? Not just what you have now, but what it may look like in the future. And again, with USF having an accelerator program, you could be in the working force much sooner, and then getting those salaries that you deserve that will be strong for you and paying off your loans much quicker. And then ask your employer about any tuition assistance programs that they may have. I know that here in Sarasota Memorial Hospital, which is a very large institution, very large hospital, has very strong tuition assistance programs. And then again, compare and consider both federal, private loans, but look at the federal loans first and take your time. And if you don't understand, ask the financial aid office to guide you through the entire process.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Carl. Those are some excellent tips and strategies and secrets. And I know that we've only touched on half of the content in the book. So the other half of the book is by Mr. Rick Darvis, and it's dedicated to paying for college in a tax-efficient manner. And as I've learned, it includes a lot of excellent case studies, and they really do address some real-life scenarios that some of our listeners may face. And one excellent example of that case study discusses paying for student loans while saving for a future house. So that is just a snapshot of some of the additional information that Carl Buck and Rick Darvis cover in this book. As I mentioned at the start of the webinar, we'll provide access to a recording of the webinar. We will also be sending out a brief survey where we can collect your feedback about the webinar. And in that survey, that is where you will complete your name and address to receive a free copy of the book. So let's, in a prior seminar and a prior webinar, Carl, we received a few questions that I thought we should bring up in this webinar as well. And one of those questions had to do with this topic. It said, do all graduate nursing programs offer either merit and or need-based scholarships?
Well, as I commented earlier in the presentation, unfortunately, some well-known top brands, if you will, are not offering the kind of funding that I thought that they might be. So no, that's not necessarily the case. And I hope in the future, with the dearth of nurses throughout the country and growing exponentially, to have them go on to advanced degrees, that funding will become available. But it's not always guaranteed.
Okay. And the other question we had received was, can you share any information on nursing loan forgiveness programs?
Yeah, what I would do, I would go to studentaid.gov. As I mentioned, they've just enhanced, revised, upgraded that website to learn more about this subject. And also I would check with the USF School of Nursing Financial Aid Office staff. They're going to have the most up-to-date and current information on that topic, because as I said earlier, it's very fluid, very dynamic, and I think changes are in the wind as we move forward.
Okay. And just one other question that comes up frequently about college loan rates and or college student loan rates, and do they stay the same or do they change every year once you get that loan? Is it static or does it change?
Well, good question. You can be locked in to once you take out your loan, you can be locked into that rate. However, the student loan interest rates, as you're starting off and taking a loan out in another year, from scratch, those interest rates can change. Now, what's interesting is, about a year ago, July 1st, the interest rates actually went down slightly.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows in this economy? It can be very mercurial. And I would say stay tuned to both federal unsub interest rates, grad plus interest rates, and private lender interest rates, because the private sector is trying to compete with the federal rates, because private lenders have no fees. And in some instances, a variable interest rate could be 3.2, believe it or not, variable. And quite often it's based on credit worthiness, but you really have to compare and contrast.
Yep. Again, excellent advice. Thank you so much, Carl. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, everyone. And as we sum up, we really truly encourage all of our listeners to reach out to the University of San Francisco School of Nursing to learn more about their innovative programs and the affordable programs. You'll be impressed with how helpful they are in the application process, and they'll definitely help you with ways to explore, how to afford your nursing degree. And as we've mentioned, following this webinar will be a brief survey, and then with that form to fill out to provide us with your name and address to receive the free book. I want to thank Carl Buck. Carl, once again, this was always a pleasure. It's tremendous to be able to present with you. We've learned so much whenever we talk to you. I want to thank our audience. I would like to thank the University of San Francisco School of Nursing. And to all of our audience, thank you so much. And we will see you at the next webinar. Have a wonderful day, and goodbye for now.